She spent 4 hours at the most beautiful table she'd ever sat at, watching the candles burn down to nothing. And when the man she'd been waiting for finally showed up, he wasn't the one she'd been texting for 6 weeks. He was the one the city was terrified of. And the moment he sat down across from her, she understood that Owen Price hadn't forgotten about their date. He'd sold her to buy himself a head start. The ice in Della Voss's champagne flute had long since melted by the time she admitted to herself that she was being stood up. It was 11 minutes past 9. Her reservation at Thornfield had been for 7. Thornfield was the kind of restaurant where the tablecloths cost more than her monthly car payment, and the sommelier remembered your last visit even if it had been 3 years ago. Owen had insisted on it. Owen had picked up the phone, called in a favor from someone he claimed was an old colleague, and gotten them a corner booth, the good one, near the window that looked out over the river. He'd made a very big show of telling her that. Della smoothed her hands over the fabric of her dress, a deep burgundy wrap that she'd found on clearance, and spent 2 weeks convincing herself she deserved to wear somewhere nice. The woman at the alterations shop had told her it was made for a woman with real curves. She'd said it like it was a compliment. Della had spent 3 days deciding whether it was. She'd bought it anyway. She'd put on the heels she saved for job interviews and funerals. She'd pinned her hair up the way that her mother always said, made her look like she had somewhere important to be. She'd left her apartment at 6:45, so she wouldn't be late. She was not late. Owen was not here. The waiter, a young man named Philip, who had been checking on her with increasing gentleness every 30 minutes, appeared at her elbow again. "Can I bring you anything else, ma'am? Another sparkling water?" "No," Della said quietly. "Just the check, please. For the bread and the water." "Of course." Philip gave her a look that was not quite pity, but lived right next door to it. "Take all the time you need." She didn't need any time. She needed to stop being here. She pulled out her phone, 14 texts to Owen. The last one, sent at 8:40, had said simply, "I hope everything is okay." Because that was the kind of person Della Voss was. She'd been abandoned in the nicest restaurant she'd ever been to, and she was still hoping the person who'd abandoned her was fine. No response. His last message to her had come in at 6:15, right as she was stepping into her cab. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You're going to look incredible." She'd read it 4 times. She'd felt it like something precious, the way you feel a thing you've been told you don't deserve. She'd saved it in her screenshots folder, where she kept things she wanted to remember. She blocked his number now, quietly, without ceremony, the way you close a window when the weather turns. She was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized financial consulting firm in downtown Chicago. She spent her working hours looking for the lie buried in the numbers, the discrepancy, the ghost transaction, the transfer that didn't add up. She was good at it. Her boss called her meticulous. Her co-workers called her the human calculator. She noticed everything and said very little, which made her very good at her job, and she had come to accept, somewhat difficult to date. Owen had found her on a dating app 6 weeks ago. His profile said he was a financial analyst. He was charming and attentive, and he had a gift for making her feel like he saw something in her that most people looked straight through. He said he admired a woman who could hold her own in a conversation. He said he liked a woman with depth. He had texted her good morning 17 days in a row, and then he had booked her a table at Thornfield and never shown up. She reached for her purse. That was when the restaurant went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that falls when every person in a room simultaneously understands that the situation has fundamentally changed. The jazz quartet in the corner stopped playing mid-bar. The sommelier, a composed man who had been performing total professionalism all evening, stepped back from the entrance with his face gone pale. 5 men walked in. They were dressed in dark suits that fit like they'd been built around them rather than bought. They moved like people who had never once been in a hurry because nothing in the world had ever dared to make them wait. Their hands rested at their sides with a particular careful stillness that Della's brain catalogued before the rest of her understood why. The man who came in behind them was the reason the room had gone quiet. He was tall, with the kind of build that suggested he had never once in his adult life been overlooked in a crowd. His dark hair was close-cropped at the sides and swept back from a face that was all hard angles and controlled expression. He was somewhere in his early 40s, and he wore it the way certain men wear authority, not as something acquired, but as something they were born carrying. His eyes, as he swept them across the room, were a pale, icy shade of grey that caught the candlelight and reflected nothing warm back. Della knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago who paid attention, and Della paid attention to everything, knew who he was. Killian Shea, head of the Shea Syndicate, which controlled the port contracts, the private gambling operations, and approximately 40% of the city's construction permits through a network of shell companies, so labyrinthine that the FBI had been trying to map them for 11 years without success. He appeared in the business section of the Tribune occasionally, always in the context of some legitimate investment or charitable donation. He never appeared in the crime blotter because the people who might have put him there had a persistent habit of becoming unavailable to testify. One of his men stepped forward, ladies and gentlemen. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, the way a doctor is calm and pleasant before bad news. Thornfield is closed for a private reservation. Please make your way to the kitchen exit at the back. Leave your belongings at the table. Someone will be in touch regarding any items of value. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room erupted. Not loudly, there were no screams, no overturned chairs, no dramatic exits. What happened was a kind of wealthy, terrified shuffle as $200 of seared duck breast was abandoned mid-bite, as engagement rings were quietly palmed and tucked into pockets, as Chicago's most well-heeled dining patrons made their very dignified, very rapid exit through the kitchen. Nobody complained. Nobody asked to see a manager. Killian Shea standing at the entrance to a restaurant was its own kind of cease and desist. Della didn't move. She told her legs to stand up. She instructed her body to join the quiet stampede moving toward the kitchen door. Her legs declined. She sat frozen in the corner booth, her burgundy dress making her feel bizarrely visible in the emptying room, like a cardinal sitting in a bare tree. Within 2 minutes, the restaurant was empty, except for the staff huddled near the kitchen pass, and Della and the 5 men, and the man they answered to. Killian Shea's gaze moved across the room like a searchlight. It stopped on her. He walked toward her. His footsteps made no sound on the hardwood floor. The candle on her table, which had been burning for 4 hours, threw moving light across his face, and Della became very aware that she was alone at a table set for 2 with a half-eaten bread basket and a melted glass of water and absolutely nowhere to go. He stopped at her table. He looked down at her. His pale eyes catalogued her the way hers had catalogued the room, quickly, thoroughly, without expression. Then, without asking permission or offering any explanation, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Della stared at him. "You're the bookkeeper," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't raise itself for emphasis because it didn't need to. Everything he said arrived, already carrying its own weight. Della blinked. "I'm sorry. Owen Price's bookkeeper." He folded his hands on the table in front of him. His knuckles had old scars on them that his tailored cuffs didn't quite cover. "The one with access to the numbered accounts." Della's mind went very still in the way it did when she was working through a balance sheet that wasn't adding up. "I'm not anyone's bookkeeper," she said slowly. "I work for Callaway Forensic Consulting on Michigan Avenue. I met Owen Price on a dating app. He told me he was a financial analyst." Something shifted in Killian Shea's expression. It wasn't quite surprise. It was more like the recalibration that happens when a very precise instrument gets new data. "He told you he was a financial analyst," he repeated. "He told me he liked jazz and hiking, and that his favorite book was Lonesome Dove." Della heard her own voice and recognized the register it had slipped into. The flat, dry precision she used when she was presenting findings to a client. She was somewhat distantly aware that she was using her professional voice with a man who reputedly had 3 confirmed homicides attached to his name, and several more that were strongly implied, and she filed that away as something she could have feelings about later. "He also told me this was going to be a good night. He was incorrect." Killian looked at her for a moment. "Tell me what you know about Owen Price. I know he has a very convincing dating profile and no apparent sense of guilt." Della looked down at her phone, then back up at him. "I know I have been sitting in this restaurant for 4 hours because I gave him the benefit of the doubt, which was clearly a mistake. I know he told me he was looking for something real, and I believed him, which is embarrassing in hindsight." She paused. "Why are you looking for him?" "Because he stole $2.8 million from my organization," Killian said. "He was our outside accounts manager for 18 months. Last Thursday, he moved the money through 7 different transfers into a holding account we've never seen before. Yesterday, he told my associates he needed 1 more day to reverse the transfers and correct the error. He said he was meeting his partner tonight, someone with access to the account credentials, at this restaurant." Killian's pale eyes stayed on her face. "He gave us this location. He gave us a description. He said his partner would be at the corner booth. The corner booth, the good one, near the window that looks out over the river." Owen had made a very big show of telling her that. The cold moved through Della the way it does when a number finally resolves into a shape you recognize. Not the shock of surprise, but the nausea of confirmation. Owen hadn't stood her up. Owen had placed her. He had described her, given her location, and then put distance between himself and the city, while Killian Shay's men converged on Thornfield. He had used her, her patience, her willingness to wait, her habit of giving people the benefit of the doubt, as a decoy detailed enough to buy himself a 12-hour head start. She had been, in the most precise and brutal sense, bait. The fear that had been sitting quietly in her chest since Killian Shay walked in evaporated. What replaced it was something cleaner and considerably hotter. "That absolute coward," Della said. Killian raised one dark eyebrow. 6 weeks. Della set her phone down on the table with a controlled precision that was its own kind of violence. 6 weeks of good morning texts. 6 weeks of "I've never met anyone like you, Della. You're so perceptive, Della. I love that you actually think before you speak. I wore heels. I have not worn heels since my cousin's wedding in 2022. I paid $22 for a round-trip cab because I didn't want to show up with flat shoes and wind-messed hair." She looked at Killian Shay with the full, steady weight of her attention. "He didn't stand me up. He dressed me up and left me at the intersection of his problems and yours, and just walked away." The room was very quiet. Behind Killian, one of his men, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Boss, she's not the contact. This is a dead end. We should clear the premises and pull the city feed for Price's last known location." Killian didn't look at him. He was looking at Della. He was looking at her the way she looked at a spreadsheet that had started to show her something unexpected. Like the numbers were rearranging themselves into a pattern he hadn't expected to find. Della reached into her bag, pulled out her Callaway Forensic Consulting employee badge, and placed it on the table next to the bread basket. She folded her hands. "I don't have your money. I don't have any account credential. I have a forensic accounting license, a gym membership I don't use enough, and a maxed-out credit card that now has a burgundy wrap dress on it that I will never be able to look at without remembering tonight." She met his gaze. "I can give you my LinkedIn profile if that would help." Something happened in Killian Shay's face. It was very brief and very controlled, but it was there. A fracture in the cold surface. A flash of something that in a less dangerous man might have been amusement. He looked at the badge. He looked at her. He knew we were watching his digital traffic, Killian said, and his voice had changed slightly. Not warmer, but more focused, like a lens adjusting. He couldn't move the account credentials electronically without us seeing it. He couldn't carry a physical drive without risking a search. He stopped. His eyes dropped to her bag. Della followed his gaze. "He sent me something 2 weeks ago," she said slowly, the shape of it assembling itself in her mind with the horrible clarity of a ledger that has finally balanced wrong. He said it was a gift, a restaurant recommendation app. He said he'd curated a private list of Chicago's best tables as a surprise for our date. He was very enthusiastic about it. He texted me 3 times asking if I'd downloaded it. She was already pulling her phone out. I couldn't get it to open properly. It kept crashing when I tried to launch it. I thought it was just a bad file. The man with the scarred eyebrow swore quietly in what sounded like Irish. Killian stood up. He was very still in the way that powerful things are still, not passive, but coiled, every cell of his attention aligned on her. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the table, and looked at her phone. "He embedded the account credentials," Killian said quietly, "in a corrupted app file, on a civilian's phone. On the phone of a woman he met on a dating app." He paused. "He walked the entire architecture of my financial network into this restaurant inside your purse." Della stared at her phone. "I've been carrying your stolen money around Chicago for 2 weeks. You've been carrying the keys to $2.8 million. Yes." He looked at her then, and the cold was still there in his face, but there was something underneath it now. Something she couldn't name. Recognition. Maybe, or a particular species of respect. "He picked you because he thought no one would look twice. He picked you because he thought you were invisible. He's not the first person to make that mistake," Della said. The scarred man. She would learn later his name was Cormac, that he had been with Killian since they were teenagers running Southside errands for men who were now dead or in federal prison, had the extraction team upstairs within 20 minutes. They worked fast and very quietly. The file yielded the account credentials, the transfer records, and a secondary account Owen had set up in the Caymans that the Shay organization hadn't known existed. They got their $2.8 million back, and then they found another $400,000 he'd been skimming off the quarterly accounts for the last 8 months. At 1 in the morning, Della's phone rang. Owen's name appeared on screen. She had blocked his number, but he was calling from a restricted line, and she recognized the area code from the number fragment that showed through. She looked at Killian. He nodded once, she answered. She put it on speaker. "Della." Owen's voice was too fast, too smooth, the way voices are when the person speaking is performing calm over a foundation of panic. "God, I'm so glad you picked up. Are you okay? What happened at the restaurant? I've been going out of my mind." She looked across the table at Killian Shay, who was watching her with the steady, unreadable expression of a man who had negotiated things considerably higher stakes than this and never once let his face give anything away. She thought about the 17 good morning texts. She thought about "You're so perceptive, Della." She thought about $22 in cab fare and a dress she bought on clearance, because she'd told herself she deserved somewhere nice to wear it. "I'm fine, Owen," she said. "I was a little worried about you. You never showed." I know," he exhaled with practiced relief. "There was an emergency. I can't explain everything right now, but I need your help. That app file I sent you, the restaurant guide, I need you to bring your phone to me, tonight. It's really important." "Why is it so important?" "It just is." A pause, the smoothness slipping slightly like a signal degrading. "Some people are after me, Della. People I owe money to. If I can get that file, I can fix everything. I just need you to trust me. I've trusted you for 6 weeks, Della said, and I'm so grateful for that. I really am. Please. His voice dropped into something that was probably meant to sound intimate. It sounded like a transaction. You're the only person I can ask. There's no one else. Where are you? The old Caldwell storage facility on the west side. Bay 47. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. A pause. And Della, hurry. I don't have a lot of time. The line went dead. Della set the phone down. Cormac was already moving toward the door. 2 of the other men were checking their weapons with the unhurried efficiency of people doing something they had done many times before. Killian was looking at her. You don't have to come, he said. It was the first time he had offered her a choice. She noticed that. I want to, she said. And then, because she was a forensic accountant and precision mattered to her, I want to look him in the face. The drive to the west side took 18 minutes through rain-slicked streets. Della sat in the back of a black SUV with bulletproof glass and leather seats that probably cost more than her couch, and she did not shake. She had expected to shake. She was surprised to find that she was very calm. The way she was calm in the final hour of a complicated audit when all the numbers were finally on the table, and she could see exactly how the deception had been constructed and exactly where it fell apart. Killian sat beside her. He didn't speak, but his presence was. She searched for the right word and settled on substantial, like a weight that organized the space around it. At one point, without looking at her, he said, You're not afraid. I am absolutely afraid, Della said. I'm also angry. The angry is louder right now. He didn't respond, but something shifted in his posture, and she had the feeling she'd said something that landed somewhere unexpected in him. The Caldwell facility was a long, low building off a dead-end access road, surrounded by cargo containers and floodlights that threw hard shadows in the rain. The SUV stopped 200 feet from Bay 47. Cormac and the others fanned out into the dark with a quiet coordination that made them nearly invisible within seconds. Walk toward the bay, Killian said. He was close to her, his voice quiet near her ear. I will be here. He will not touch you. Della nodded. She got out of the car. She walked across the wet pavement in the heels she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding, and she did not stumble, and she did not look behind her, and her heart was beating very hard, but her face was still. Della. Owen stepped out from behind a cargo container. She had known him for 6 weeks and met him in person for the first time tonight, here, in the rain, by a storage bay on the west side of Chicago. He looked terrible, suit wrinkled, hair damp, eyes too bright, with the specific energy of someone who had been running and lying for long enough that they'd started to blur together. He had a phone in one hand, and his other hand was behind his back. I'm glad you came, he said. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, Della said. Do you have your phone? I do. Good. He took a step toward her. The hand behind his back came forward. He was holding a gun, small and dark, and his hand wasn't entirely steady. Put it on the ground and kick it to me. Nice and easy. I don't want this to be complicated. Della looked at the gun. She looked at Owen. She thought about 6 weeks of good morning texts. She thought about you're so perceptive. She thought about sitting alone in a restaurant for 4 hours in a dress she'd spent 2 weeks convincing herself she deserved to wear. You used me, she said. Della, you built a person for me to fall for. You made him thoughtful and attentive and interested, and then you filed me away as a storage device. She tilted her head. I spent a year after my last relationship telling myself I was too much to deal with, too intense, too careful, too present. You made me think I'd finally found someone who thought those were good things. She paused. You're a coward, Owen. You're a small, frightened, cowardly man, and you are genuinely the worst thing that has happened to me this year, and I was audited in February. Owen's face went through several things quickly. The smoothness was entirely gone. What was underneath it was uglier. A mean, cornered thing that she recognized. because she had seen it before in men who had been told they were exceptional for so long that ordinary accountability felt like persecution. "You really think you deserve better than this?" he said, and his voice had dropped the performance entirely. It was just contempt now, flat and cold. "You sat in that restaurant for 4 hours, Della. No self-respecting woman waits 4 hours. I knew you would. I planned on it. You were easy. Kick me the phone, you know," a voice said from the darkness behind Della. "I've heard a lot of men try to talk their way out of difficult situations." Owen Price looked up. Killian Shea stepped into the light from the flood lamps. He was still in his suit, which was somehow still immaculate. Behind him, Cormac and 4 others materialized from the shadows between the containers, their weapons level and unhurried. Owen's gun hand dropped. "Mr. Shea," he started. "I can explain. The transfers. It was the Callahan group. They approached me 8 months ago. I didn't have a choice. They said if I didn't cooperate, they would. You have $40,000 of mine that we found tonight that you've been skimming quarterly for 8 months, Killian said. He crossed the distance between them without hurrying. He stopped 3 feet from Owen, and Owen seemed to shrink without moving, as if Killian's proximity operated on him like a physical force. "You stole from my organization. You made my people look foolish. You spent 6 weeks lying to a woman who did nothing but give you her honesty." He paused. His pale eyes moved briefly to Della, and something passed through them that was different from everything she'd seen in his face tonight. Quieter, more deliberate. "Those first 2 things I would have resolved with you eventually. The third one," he said, "I'm going to resolve right now." Owen tried to run. He made it approximately 4 feet before Cormac and another man had him by the arms. Killian turned to Della. He walked toward her with the same unhurried certainty with which he did everything, and when he stopped in front of her, he was close enough that she could smell cedar and cold rain and something dark and expensive underneath. "Are you all right?" he said. It was a simple question. He asked it like he cared about the answer. "Yes," Della said. And then, because she was honest, "I'm also tired, and my feet hurt, and I would like to eat something, because I haven't had anything since a protein bar at 11 this morning, and the bread at Thornfield was very good, but I was too anxious to eat more than 1 piece." Something moved in Killian Shea's face that she had no word for. It arrived quietly and settled, like a thing finding the place it had always been meant to occupy. He held out his hand. "There's a diner on Halstead that's open until 4, he said. "Their eggs are good, their coffee is better." A pause. "Come with me." Della looked at his hand. She looked at him, at the pale, careful eyes, and the old scars on his knuckles, and the face that the city was afraid of, and that had been, tonight, entirely focused on her. She thought about the first week after her last relationship ended, eating cereal for dinner alone in her apartment, deciding she asked too many questions and noticed too many things and took up too much room. She thought about 6 weeks of good morning texts from a man who saw in her only the shape of a useful tool. She thought about a burgundy dress she'd spent 2 weeks convincing herself she was allowed to wear somewhere. She thought about the way Killian had said he thought you were invisible, like that was the most incomprehensible thing he'd heard in recent memory. She put her hand in his fingers closed around hers, warm, certain, with the careful steadiness of a man who did not take hold of things he didn't intend to keep. "I have questions," she said as they walked back through the rain toward the car, a significant number of them. "About the shell companies, specifically. The Tribune's reporting has some gaps." "I'm aware," Killian said. "I'm not asking as a journalist," she clarified. "I'm asking as someone who spent 3 hours tonight with nothing to do but think, and I noticed some structural inconsistencies in the publicly available filings that I would very much like to understand." He looked down at her. The floodlights caught his face at an angle that made his expression difficult to read. But she thought, she was fairly certain, that it was not displeasure. "You noticed structural inconsistencies," he said. In my shell companies. The 2021 to 2023 property transfers through the Lakeview Holdings cluster have a timing pattern that suggests a common originating account that isn't reflected in any of the public filings. Either the originating account is offshore, and the transfers were routed through a domestic intermediary, which is a fairly standard structure, or there's a secondary organizational layer that the existing filings don't capture, which would be considerably more interesting. She paused. I'm very good at my job. I know, Killian said. I ran your professional history 40 minutes ago. Della considered that. And you have a 100% resolution rate on fraud cases over the last 6 years. He held the car door open for her. You found a discrepancy in a Fortune 500 subsidiary in 2022 that their own internal audit team had missed for 11 quarters. A pause. I'd been considering bringing on a forensic analyst for some time. Della got into the car. She looked up at him. That's a very complicated conflict of interest, she said. Yes, Killian agreed. He got in beside her. The door closed. The city moved past the windows, rain blurred and glittering. We'll work it out. She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead, his profile clean and certain in the passing light. She thought, this is not what I thought tonight was going to be. She thought, that's all right. She had spent long enough being easy to overlook, easy to discount, easy to use as a prop in someone else's exit strategy. She had spent long enough apologizing for her size, her precision, her habit of seeing everything and saying nothing until she was certain. She had spent long enough waiting for someone to show up. Outside, Chicago moved through the rain. Ahead, on Halstead, a diner was open, and there were eggs and coffee and a man beside her who had looked at everything Owen Price had dismissed as invisible and seen, instead, someone worth keeping close. She settled back against the leather seat. She had not lost tonight. She had simply found out, at long last, exactly what she was worth. And it was considerably more than anyone had bothered to tell her.